The fortune teller looked at the girl's face and determined that she was destined to be a widow. She warned the girl not to marry too early when she grew up, otherwise she would face 2 marriages. But the girl did not believe the fortune teller's advice. Instead, she chose to get married right after graduating from college. Unexpectedly, she lost her husband and father-in-law on the 10th day of her marriage. Upon hearing the bad news, the mother-in-law fainted from the shock. The grandmother rushed over to comfort her granddaughter. At that moment, the aunt mentioned again that Minsu was destined to be a widow. Unfortunately, the mother-in-law overheard their conversation. She blamed Minsu for the deaths of her husband and son. At that moment, the relationship between the 2 women was completely broken. During the funeral, the mother-in-law angrily told Minsu to leave. Only after Minsu's desperate pleas did her mother-in-law soften her heart and agree. But what Suki didn't expect was that her daughter-in-law would get up in the middle of the night and eat a large meal. Minsu didn't look like someone who had just lost her husband. At that moment, Suki completely lost it and knocked the food on the table onto the floor. Minsu said tearfully that she was just hungry. Enraged, Suki kicked her daughter-in-law out of the house. Minsu could only kneel on the ground and beg her mother-in-law to let her stay. At this moment, Suki believed that Minsu had indirectly killed her husband and son. Minsu painfully said that she would leave the family. Hearing this, Suki coldly rushed into her room. Minsu, who had been kicked out of the house, could only return to her mother's house in the middle of the night. Her grandmother looked at her distraught granddaughter and endured the pain in her heart. She knew that her child must have been suffering greatly these past few days. When Minsu returned home, she ate like a starving wolf. She hadn't had a full meal since her husband's death. The reason for her increased appetite was that she was pregnant. However, Minsu didn't realize that she was carrying her husband's child, because her husband's body had not been recovered. Minsu went to the police station every day to inquire about the situation. However, the police told her that the search had been called off. It turned out that Suki had given up looking for her son's remains. Minsu couldn't accept this fact and found her mother-in-law to beg her not to give up hope. Even if her husband was dead, she wanted to see his remains. However, Suki believed that only by letting go could their son rest in peace. Poor Minsu hadn't even had time to register her marriage with her husband. Therefore, she had no legal right to demand that the police continue the search. Suki couldn't bear the pain of missing her husband and son, and she was depressed every day. To forget the suffering she was enduring, she decided to leave this heartbreaking place and move abroad. Before leaving, she arranged to meet Minsu's grandmother. Suki handed over Minsu's valuable belongings to the elderly woman to take back. She explained that she liked Minsu very much. After all, Minsu was still so young and shouldn't be immersed in pain. She should live a good life and find her own happiness. Minsu was devastated when she learned that her mother-in-law had suddenly left the country. She felt that her husband might still be alive and that her mother-in-law shouldn't just leave like that. Her grandmother comforted her and told her to let go of everything and live a good life. Minsu refused to accept reality and became so emotional that she started having abdominal pains. Her family took her to the hospital, where they learned that she was pregnant. Her senile mother was very excited to hear the news. However, her aunt did not support Minsu becoming a single mother. After all, she did not have a marriage certificate and was unmarried. If a child suddenly appeared, it would affect her future happiness. Minsu was very happy to know that she was carrying her deceased husband's child, so she immediately went everywhere to find her mother-in-law to tell her the good news. But her mother-in-law had disappeared, and no one knew where she was. Minsu decided to keep the baby with the support of her grandmother. It was a gift from God, so she couldn't abort it. 7 years passed quickly. Through hard work, Minsu became a fashion designer. Her son grew up under the care of his family. At the same time, her mother-in-law, who had been abroad for 7 years, finally returned home. However, she had already entered another marriage after reuniting with her first love. Suki had believed that she would never cross paths with Minsu again, but she did not know that Minsu had given birth to her grandson 7 years ago. Every year on her husband's anniversary, Minsu would bring the child to the beach to mourn. While buying water, she encountered her old friend Taehan. What Minsu didn't know was that his former mother-in-law was Taehan's stepmother. Taehan was accompanying his stepmother to pay respects to her husband and son who had died 7 years ago. This was also the first time Suki had come to this place since returning to the country. After all, she was still very concerned about her son, whose body had not been found. Just as Suki was calling out her son's name and feeling guilty, a child's voice broke the silence. The boy said the name of his deceased father. Suki looked at the cute child and wanted to go up and touch his head, but an old man nearby called him over and told him not to run around. At that moment, Suki felt that this child really looked like her son, but she didn't know that the boy in front of her was actually her grandson. When Minsu came back with the water, His son told him what had just happened. He said that there was a grandmother whose son had the same name as his father. Hearing this, Min-soo immediately realized that his mother-in-law had returned. She hurriedly looked around to see if her mother-in-law was anywhere to be found, but unfortunately, she couldn't find her. It turned out that Suki had already gotten into Taehan's car and left. Although the two were not related by blood, they had gotten along very well over the years. Now a designer, Min-soo went to K Company for an interview and happened to run into his college classmate, Mina. However, Mina really didn't want to see Min-soo. In college, they were rivals for the same guy, and the guy she had a crush on ended up marrying Min-soo. Only someone who has been hurt can understand the pain of such a loss. So when Mina saw the design Min-soo handed her, she deliberately glanced at it casually and told her to go home and wait for her call. Min-soo knew that Mina's mother and her mother-in-law were high school classmates, so she took the opportunity to ask Mina about her mother-in-law. But Mina didn't want Min-soo to have anything to do with her wealthy mother-in-law, so she lied and said she didn't know where she was. At that moment, Suki was actually meeting Mina's mother at a restaurant. Mina's mother was determined to marry her daughter into a wealthy family, so when she saw her classmate, who was now a wealthy woman, she naturally tried to curry favor with her. She even praised her classmate for having a better life than herself, saying that her husband and son were still alive and she could marry into a wealthy family. At that moment, Suki was completely enraged. She picked up a glass of water and threw it in her classmate's face. When she returned home, Sunja could only cry to her husband and daughter about what had happened to her. She swore that she would marry Mina off to torment Suki. Mina knew that her mother had caused trouble, so she took the initiative to go to Suki's house to apologize. Suki saw that Mina was sincere, so she asked her to stay for dinner. Just as the family was happily entertaining their guests, someone suddenly rang the doorbell. Mina thought it was Taehan returning and rushed out excitedly. Upon checking, she discovered it was Min-soo standing at the door. It turned out that during her job interview earlier that day, Min-soo had accidentally bumped into Taehan's older brother. In the commotion, she picked up the documents he was holding but accidentally left her phone behind. The man who found the phone then notified Min-soo to come to the house that evening to retrieve it. Mina didn't want Min-soo to see Suki, so she immediately tried to chase her away. The eldest son of the wealthy family saw this and told Mina to open the door quickly. He explained that he had found the phone belonging to the girl at the door. At that moment, Mina was panicking. She really didn't want the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law to meet under such circumstances. In the end, Min-soo was allowed inside. That day, Min-soo's son recognized Suki at first glance. He also learned from his mother about his relationship with Suki. Suki looked puzzled when she heard the boy's words. It wasn't until Min-soo appeared that she finally understood everything. Suki also knew that the little boy in front of her was the child left behind by her deceased son. At that moment, she couldn't believe it and touched her grandson. Filled with self-blame, she shouldn't have abandoned her daughter-in-law and grandson 7 years ago and fled abroad. However, Min-soo's grandmother did not blame Suki for her harsh decision back then. She believed that Suki had chosen to forget the pain and return, which brought comfort to everyone. But when they learned that Suki had remarried, they were somewhat surprised. They had originally hoped that the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law could reunite and live together. The sudden arrival of a grandson made Suki both happy and helpless. Suki was happy because her deceased son finally had an heir, but she felt helpless because her husband's ex-wife had once warned her, if she found out that Suki had a child of her own, she would stop at nothing to fight for all of her son's inheritance. So Suki had no choice but to keep the secret of her grandson a secret for the time being. She believed that this was the best way to protect him. However, Suki did not hide this from her husband. After all, as husband and wife, they should be honest with each other. When President Lee learned that his wife suddenly had a grandson, he was very happy for her. He never imagined that his deceased son would have a successor. With the help of his close friend Taehan, Min-soo successfully secured a position as a designer at K Company. This made Mina, who was watching nearby, extremely displeased. She had repeatedly tried to stop her classmate from entering the company, but her efforts were in vain. Unwilling to accept this, Mina approached Min-soo and asked her about her relationship with Taehan. Min-soo explained that she and Taehan were just ordinary friends. Upon hearing this, Mina finally smiled. Then she deliberately told Min-soo that she and Taehan had been dating for 7 years. She hoped Min-soo wouldn't get too close to her boyfriend, or else there would be gossip at the company. After Mina's explanation, Min-soo realized that Taehan was the second son of a wealthy family. When the two met at the company, they deliberately kept their distance. Taehan noticed Min-soo's unusual behavior and chased after her to send her home, because he had feelings for Min-soo 7 years ago. But at that time, Min-soo had a boyfriend, so he chose to let go. Now that Taehan knows she is a single mother, He has no reservations. Meanwhile, Mina's mother came to apologize to her classmates for saying the wrong thing last time. As a result, she accidentally saw Minsu's meeting with Suki. At that moment, Sunja panicked. She was afraid that her daughter's recent lies would be exposed. After all, Mina had returned to the country with Suki. Sunja urged her daughter to hurry and stop Minsu and Suki from meeting. With no other option, Mina drove after Minsu. After a moment of internal struggle, she suddenly stepped on the gas pedal. As expected, a car accident was about to happen, but Mina didn't expect there to be a pregnant woman inside the car. The injured woman immediately felt severe abdominal pain, but fortunately, she was taken to the hospital and was not seriously injured. Minsu also suffered a head injury, so she had to call her mother-in-law to cancel the meeting. Mina was very happy to have gotten what she wanted. Just as the two were about to leave, Mina accidentally overheard that Minsu had a son. Mina then spread rumors at the company that the new designer got the job through connections. She also slandered Minsu, a single mother, saying that she was trying to seduce the second son of a wealthy family. In an instant, everyone disliked the new colleague. Taehan immediately walked over and scolded his subordinates for spreading rumors. Minsu saw this and was very grateful to Taehan. The relationship between the two slowly began to change in a mysterious way. In order to spend more time alone with the person he liked, Taehan deliberately went to play with Minsu's son every few days. Tom had been very fond of this new uncle lately, because Taehan always finds excuses to stay with Minsu. Auntie notices Taehan's feelings for Minsu, so she takes the opportunity to try to bring the two together. Taehan excitedly says he loves Minsu very much. Minsu accuses him of talking nonsense. After being scolded, Taehan feels extremely embarrassed. After all, they are just friends and shouldn't say such things too soon. They were afraid it would be awkward to see each other at work. Ever since Suki found out she was going to have a grandchild, she has been troubled. Her husband's ex-wife warned her not to have children of her own, or she would do whatever it takes to get the property for her own children. Fortunately, President Lee loves his second wife very much. He told Suki not to worry too much and that he would protect the child. That night, President Lee urgently called a family meeting. Under his encouragement, his wife revealed the news about the grandson. Only by doing this could Suki have a proper relationship with her grandson in the future. President Lee's children were shocked when they heard the news. They never expected their stepmother to suddenly have a grandson out of nowhere. This made the youngest daughter of the wealthy family feel uneasy. She feared that her stepmother would find the grandson and fight for the inheritance. Taehan believed that his father would handle the matter appropriately and that they only needed to wait for the outcome. However, Sarah feared that her older brother and mother would never let the matter rest if they found out. They would certainly cause a commotion with their father. Sure enough, it wasn't long before Taehan's mother learned of the matter. She was convinced that Suki had intentionally concealed the existence of the grandson with the aim of contesting the family fortune after marriage. She immediately sought out Suki that day. When the two women met, they naturally did not look at each other kindly. In-suk believed that Suki was doing this to fight for the inheritance with her sons. Suki warned In-suk to leave immediately or she would call the police. In-suk knew that she was in no position to stay there, so she left. In order to ruin Suki, In-suk asked her best friend to take her to Minsu's house. Unexpectedly, as soon as she got out of the car, she felt uneasy about her surroundings. At that moment, a bad memory suddenly came flooding back. 8 years ago, In-suk had gone out on a date with her boyfriend without telling her husband. On the way, she crashed her car into a motorcycle, killing the driver instantly. The woman sitting in the back seat was not seriously injured and recognized In-suk's face. The driver's wife couldn't accept the truth and went crazy. Every time she saw In-suk, she would lose control of her emotions for no apparent reason. In-suk didn't want to step inside, but for the sake of her children, she forced herself to walk in with a calm expression. She didn't see Minsu at home, so she took out a red envelope and gave it to her grandmother. In-suk told the old woman to tell Minsu to take the money and leave with the children. But then In-suk spotted a photo of Minsu's husband, Juno, on the table. This reminded her of a painful memory she wanted to forget. Back then, in order to cover up the fact that she had hit someone with her car, she deliberately lured her young boyfriend to the seaside and took the opportunity to kill him. Unexpectedly, Juno happened to see the whole scene. This led to Juno getting himself into a deadly situation. And the person who wanted to kill him was none other than In-suk. When In-suk found out that Juno was Suki's son, she couldn't sit still anymore. At that moment, she was so scared that she couldn't think straight and just wanted to run away. That day, Suki unexpectedly encountered her son, who had been dead for 7 years, on the street. But her son walked past her without a word. In disbelief, Suki immediately grabbed the man. Unfortunately, upon seeing his face, She realized she had mistaken him for someone else. With no other option, Suki reluctantly let go of his hand. After all, her son had been dead for 7 years. How could he still be alive? Unexpectedly, Minsu's mother mentioned that she had seen Juno on TV. Upon hearing this, Suki couldn't help but ask Minsu what Juno was doing at the time. Minsu's mother carefully recalled the scene on TV and said that Juno was sleeping at the time. Since she had mental health issues, Suki didn't take her words seriously. However, Suki never imagined that her son was actually lying in a nursing home. Coincidentally, she had just brought a group of wealthy women there for a charity event. She didn't rest for a moment and was personally helping out. In contrast, Sunja sneaked into the patient's room and took the opportunity to slack off. She even took a picture of herself doing volunteer work. The vegetative man lying next to her was Juno, who had been missing for 7 years. But Sunja didn't recognize the man on the bed. She just sighed that it was such a pity that such a handsome man was in a vegetative state, because she was always slacking off. Everyone was dissatisfied with her, so Suki had no choice but to remind her. But when she arrived at Juno's ward, Sunja blocked her at the door. Sunja lied and said she had already cleaned everything inside. Suki saw this and didn't want to expose her, so she led her to wash the sheets. Thus, the mother and son missed another opportunity to meet. Minsu's mother had always wanted to find her daughter's missing husband. She believed her son-in-law must be hiding somewhere and hadn't returned home, so she tells her family that she is going to participate in a TV show to find Juno. Before long, she takes her grandson to participate in a singing contest. On stage, Minsu's mother shouts at the camera, telling Juno to come home soon. Tom holds his father's photo in front of the camera and cries uncontrollably. Soon, the TV show about Minsu's mother's search for her son-in-law is posted online. The patients at the nursing home also see the video. When the man sees the photo in the child's hand, he is very surprised. Juno looks so much like the vegetative patient lying next to him. Sunja, who used to work as a nurse at the nursing home, also saw the program. She told her husband that she felt like she recognized him, since participating in the charity event last time. Sunja had been eager to take credit for it. She urged Suki to publicize this good deed, but to her surprise, Suki flatly refused. Suki believed that charity should not be publicized. At that moment, Sunja could only smile to break the awkward silence. Later, during a casual conversation, she suddenly mentioned the vegetative patient at the nursing home. She remembered that she had taken a photo and wanted to show it to Suki so she could see the poor young man. However, just as she took out her phone, Suki was called away by her nanny. Thus, the mother and son missed another chance to meet. Meanwhile, Mina was jealous of Minsu and Taehan's closeness, so she deliberately found In-suk and told her that Minsu was a single mother. In-suk couldn't believe what she heard. She would never allow her son to date a woman like that. That day, In-suk found Minsu and slapped her hard across the face. She also cursed Minsu, calling her a shameless, bad woman. Minsu felt deeply wronged after being slapped. Just then, Taehan walked in and witnessed the scene. Minsu realized from their tone that they were mother and son. She hoped In-suk would apologize to her. She also stated that she and Taehan were just friends, since she had just been humiliated so badly. Minsu promised on the spot that she would have no further involvement with Taehan. In-suk didn't expect her actions to backfire. Taehan was very unhappy after Minsu distanced herself from him. Every day, he deliberately followed Minsu around like a shadow. As a result, the two of them got stuck at the company gate and became a laughingstock. Mina was very jealous when she saw them fighting at the gate, so she started giving Minsu a hard time at work and made her clean the warehouse. With no other choice, Minsu obediently followed orders after all. Mina was her superior. Just as Minsu was struggling to move heavy objects, Taehan rushed in to help. Thanks to Taehan's persistent efforts, their relationship began to improve. Minsu no longer felt averse to being close to Taehan and instead interacted with him like a normal friend. Unfortunately, this scene was witnessed by Suki, who had just arrived at the company. At that moment, Suki realized that her former daughter-in-law was working at her husband's company. Seeing her and her stepson laughing and talking together, Suki finally realized that the girl Taehan liked was Minsu. For a moment, she didn't know how to deal with this relationship. She tentatively asked Minsu if she was dating Taehan. Although Minsu didn't know that Suki was Taehan's stepmother, she still hurriedly explained that they were just ordinary friends. When Suki asked Minsu if she still loved Juno, Minsu hesitated. At that moment, she realized that she was slowly forgetting her ex-husband. Suki was a little disappointed to hear Minsu's answer today, but she knew that it was a good thing for Minsu to forget Juno. After all, people cannot live in pain forever, and she hoped that her daughter-in-law would find a good home. So Suki asked Taehan at home about his feelings for Minsu. To her surprise, Taehan couldn't help but smile when he mentioned the person he loved. He openly confessed his feelings for Min-soo to his stepmother. Suki didn't know whether to be happy or worried, because Mina had been deliberately hiding Min-soo's existence from both her mother-in-law and stepmother. Now Suki realized that Mina had been lying to her all along, but she didn't expose the lie. Instead, she reminded Mina to invite Min-soo out for a meal together someday. Mina did this because she didn't want Suki and Min-soo to meet, but she didn't know that the two had already met many times before. That day, the company was holding a new product launch event. When Mina found out that Suki and Min-soo would both be there, she immediately panicked. To prevent the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law from appearing at the launch event together, Mina deliberately asked Min-soo to go to the warehouse to fetch some samples before the event. When Min-soo entered, she found the door locked. No matter how hard she pushed, there was no response. It turned out that Mina had blocked the door with a wooden stick, believing that as long as Min-soo was locked inside, she couldn't meet Suki. Fearing she would miss the event, Min-soo used all her strength to try to break down the warehouse door. However, the door didn't open, and the boxes on top fell down. Tae-hun, who hadn't seen Min-soo for a long time, grew anxious and prepared to go look for him. Just then, Min-soo arrived at the scene in a disheveled state, panting and explaining that she had been locked in the sample room. At that moment, In-suk suddenly burst in. It turned out that In-suk had conspired with her eldest son to take over the company by posing as an investor. At that moment, President Lee realized that his eldest son had betrayed him. Overcome with anger, he fainted on the spot, forcing the press conference to be suspended. Mina was afraid that Min-soo would find out that she had locked her in the warehouse, so in her panic, she decided to delete the surveillance footage. However, she discovered that Min-soo had just left the surveillance room. Min-soo didn't understand why her former classmate would betray her behind her back. At this moment, Mina no longer pretends. In college, Min-soo stole Juno, whom she had a secret crush on. Now, Tae-hun, whom she has loved for 7 years, has also been stolen by Min-soo. How can she swallow this bitter pill? She reminds Min-soo that if he knows what's good for him, he should not stay in the same company as her. At this moment, the once good friends have completely turned against each other. That night, Mina drinks heavily and ends up at Tae-hun's doorstep. She decided to reveal that Min-soo and Suki were mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Surprisingly, it was Suki who opened the door. Her purpose was to drive Mina away, but Mina was already there. She couldn't just leave without doing anything. This woman with the intelligence of a 5-year-old was lost. As a result, she was accidentally dragged into the group heading to the nursing home. The old woman thought that following everyone onto the bus would take her home. However, upon getting off the bus, she realized the surroundings were completely unfamiliar. Just then, a dementia patient from the nursing home recognized her, but the old woman didn't recognize the man in front of her. The patient ignored the old woman's objections and tried to drag her into the ward. It turned out that Min-soo's mother had recently appeared on a TV show searching for her son-in-law. The man had seen the patient lying in bed and noticed he resembled the person on TV, so he took it upon himself to drag Min-soo's mother into their ward, claiming that the person she was looking for was lying there. Min-soo's mother couldn't believe it and walked over to check. Sure enough, she saw Juno, who had been dead for 7 years. At that moment, she excitedly called out Juno's name, but Juno was in a vegetative state and showed no reaction. Just then, a staff member came in to check on the patients and saw Min-soo's mother. Since she was a stranger, they escorted her out. Helpless, Min-soo's mother took advantage of the staff's inattention and kicked the staff member hard. She then fled at top speed, escaping their sight. After the staff left, Min-soo's mother returned to Juno's room. This time, she was determined to keep a close eye on her son-in-law and not let him disappear suddenly like he did 7 years ago, because she had been waiting by the ward and forgotten to go home. Min-soo had been frantically searching for his mother outside, but she searched everywhere her mother had been and couldn't find her. Fortunately, Tae-hun noticed a surveillance camera nearby and spotted Min-soo's mother. He rushed to the security room to check the nearby surveillance footage. It turned out that Min-soo's mother had been taken away in a nursing home vehicle. Min-soo and Tae-hun rushed over immediately. When the elderly woman heard her daughter's voice, she rushed out excitedly. She was going to pull Min-soo into the ward to see Juno. Min-soo was relieved to see her mother safe and sound in front of her. At that moment, her mother told her about seeing Juno, but before they could finish talking, the staff rushed over. Her mother was so scared that she immediately hid behind Min-soo, afraid that these people would take her away. After being urged by the staff, Min-soo had no choice but to take her mother away. But the mother insisted that Juno lived here and refused to leave. However, Min-soo believed that her mother was talking nonsense and didn't take her words seriously from the beginning. She angrily accused her mother of causing trouble in the middle of the night. With no other choice, the elderly woman could only follow them home. Feeling wronged, Minsu's mother returned safely, finally allowing her grandmother and aunt to breathe a sigh of relief. If she had encountered bad people outside, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Thanks to Taehan's help, the family was deeply grateful to him. Taehan, however, was so busy that he didn't return home until late at night. To his surprise, he found his stepmother sitting in the living room, lost in thought. It turned out that she hadn't gone to sleep because she was waiting for him. Suki's purpose was to remind Taehan not to continue his relationship with Minsu. She believed that the two of them were from completely different worlds. In fact, Suki was doing this entirely for Minsu's sake. After all, Taehan's mother had already made a threat yesterday. She said that if she saw Minsu and her son together again, she would stop at nothing to make that woman disappear from the world. And In-suk's cruelty was never just empty words. But before Suki could finish speaking, Taehan interrupted her. Taehan thought his stepmother looked down on Minsu because she was a single mother, so he firmly stated that he didn't care about such things. Suki couldn't stop Taehan from changing his mind, so she had no choice but to go and talk to Minsu herself. As soon as she entered the house, Minsu's mother couldn't wait to tell her about what happened last night. But no matter how clearly Minsu's mother explained, her family thought she was talking nonsense and no one believed her. That day, when Suki went to the nursing home to do charity work and clean, she suddenly noticed a red potted plant on the windowsill. This reminded her of what Minsu's mother had said about Juno having such a plant by his side. At that moment, Suki had a bold idea. Could her son, who had been dead for 7 years, be lying in this ward? As she nervously pulled back the curtains, she was surprised to find no patient in the bed. When she saw the name on the bedside table, she realized it wasn't her son's. She immediately thought she had imagined it. After all, Juno had been dead for so many years. How could he still be alive? In fact, Juno had been pushed into the men's bathroom by the staff to take a shower. Mina's mother accidentally walked in and was scolded by the staff. She left in embarrassment. At that moment, Sunja saw Minsu's mother walking over with Taehan. She was so scared that she quickly hid to one side. Ever since Minsu's mother saw Juno at the nursing home last time, she had told her family about it. However, because her mother had mental health issues, no one believed her. This led to her feeling depressed every day. Taehan was afraid that Minsu's mother would run off again, so he agreed to take her to the nursing home to see Juno. But when the two of them arrived at the nursing home ward, they found the bed empty with no one there. Taehan could only persuade Minsu's mother to come back tomorrow, but they happened to run into his stepmother, who was walking in. Minsu's mother called Suki Juno's mother. Taehan finally realized that the woman he liked was his stepmother's former daughter-in-law. For a moment, Taehan didn't know how to face Minsu in the future. According to family relations, Minsu was his sister-in-law in name. When he sent Minsu's mother back home, he was clearly in a low mood, and his eyes betrayed a sense of distance and coldness. But Minsu was unaware of the underlying relationship at that moment. She simply looked at Taehan's behavior today with some confusion. That day, the company went hiking in the countryside. Minsu was almost caught by Taehan, who grabbed her just in time. Mina saw this and felt very uncomfortable, so she immediately pushed Taehan away. She even accused Minsu of deliberately acting weak to get Taehan's attention. She believed that Minsu had already ruined Juno 7 years ago and shouldn't be harming other men now. Minsu heard this and immediately demanded an apology, but Mina slapped Minsu hard across the face. Minsu was heartbroken by what she said and even thought that she made sense, so she could only numb herself with alcohol and drink non-stop. In her drunken haze, she saw her deceased husband. She had waited too long for 7 years, and it was as if someone else had moved into her heart. Just as Minsu was about to apologize to her husband for changing her heart, the face of Juno in front of her turned into Taehan's. Because Minsu said there was someone else in her heart, Taehan changed his mind. He simply couldn't bear to give up this relationship so easily, so he decided to reveal his true feelings to the woman. But Mina's cup of water shattered the atmosphere. In Mina's eyes, Minsu's behavior was nothing but an attempt to seduce Taehan. Enraged, she blurted out that Taehan and Suki were mother and son. This was too much for Minsu to believe, so she naturally rejected Taehan's confession. She also told Taehan to treat Mina well. But when Mina heard this, she thought Minsu was being insincere. She was about to hit Minsu when Taehan stopped her. Because of Mina's constant harassment, Taehan had had enough. She begged Mina to let go of her feelings. Although both sets of parents wanted the two to date, love couldn't be forced. After being rejected, Mina blamed all her resentment on Minsu. Minsu told her to stop being unreasonable and to go pursue Taehan instead. Mina then deliberately told In-suk that Taehan had confessed his feelings to Minsu. Hearing this, In-suk completely lost her composure. Last time, She warned Min-soo not to go near her son. She didn't expect that after so long, the two still hadn't sorted out their relationship, so In-suk rushed to Min-soo's house and made a scene. While flipping through a magazine, Suki unexpectedly saw her son who had been dead for 7 years. At that moment, she was completely stunned. It turned out that the police had come earlier that morning to inform her that Juno was still alive. At the time, Suki thought the police had made a mistake and didn't believe them, so she didn't go with the police to the nursing home to confirm his identity. Now, she had seen her son's photo in the magazine at the nursing home. Suki rushed to the police station immediately. She wanted to investigate a patient named Lee Yujin at the nursing home. When she opened the file, she discovered that Lee Yujin was indeed Juno. Suki never imagined that her son had been right beside her all along. To reunite the mother and son as soon as possible, the police personally drove Suki to the nursing home, but when they arrived, the person in the bed was gone. The disappearance of her son left Suki panicking and at a loss. She never guessed that Juno had been taken away by In-suk. It turned out that when the police found Suki that day, In-suk had seen them. In an instant, In-suk was thrown into a panic, because it was this police officer who had summoned her back then when she killed her boyfriend. Now that he had come looking for her personally, he must have discovered something. So In-suk immediately sent her men to investigate Officer Who. After tracking him down, they finally obtained a lead. It turned out that officer who had found Juno, who had been missing for 7 years. Upon hearing this, In-suk completely lost her composure, because back then, Juno had witnessed her kill her boyfriend. If Juno revealed the truth, she would definitely go to prison. So In-suk sent a group of people pretending to be Juno's family to take him away. When In-suk confirmed that the man at the nursing home was Juno, she immediately wanted to silence him. Therefore, the group had no choice but to dig a hole on the spot and prepare to bury Juno alive. However, In-suk suddenly changed her mind after leaving. She immediately called her men and ordered them to stop. She wanted to hide Juno first and wait for an opportunity to use him in the future. Suki was in pain because her son had disappeared again. The police said that Juno might have been kidnapped. Now, they could only wait for the police to investigate and wait for the results. That day, Min-soo came to work as usual, but found that a photo of herself and Taehan had been posted on the company bulletin board. It was full of ugly words about how Min-soo seduced her mother-in-law's son and angrily scolded single mothers for trying to climb the social ladder. Min-soo, who had no idea what was going on, took a closer look and finally understood the situation. Nina angrily scolded Min-soo in front of all her colleagues, calling her shameless. She thought Taehan was her boyfriend, so how could Min-soo do such a thing? At that moment, Min-soo couldn't explain herself even if she had 10 mouths. She was devastated and didn't know how to deal with the situation. When Taehan rushed to the company and found out about it, he discovered that Min-soo had already quit her job. He also knew that he had no right to ask Min-soo to stay. He could only let Min-soo leave this place that had broken her heart. But even though Min-soo had quit her job, the rumors about her spread to her son's kindergarten. This led to a group of mothers at the kindergarten gate berating Min-soo's son and even demanding that he be expelled immediately. They believed that having such a parent would corrupt their children. Min-soo's aunt was so enraged that she got into a physical altercation with the women. The child couldn't handle the shock and fainted on the spot. Soki, upon hearing that her grandson had fainted, rushed to the hospital. When she learned there was nothing seriously wrong, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. Min-soo decided to cut off all ties with her mother-in-law to protect her son. Since Juno had been dead for so many years, they could no longer be considered mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Now, she just wanted to live a peaceful life with her child. Suki had originally wanted to tell her daughter-in-law that her son was still alive, but at that moment, she couldn't bring herself to say anything because she felt so sorry for everything Min-soo had gone through. Taehan, who had been hiding nearby, heard Min-soo's thoughts. Unwilling to see the person he loved suffer anymore, he decided to give up the relationship. Taehan called his mother to ask for a meeting. He didn't want Min-soo to be hurt anymore. In-suk nearly fainted when she heard her son was coming home. What if Juno, whom she had hidden in the house, was discovered? In an emergency, In-suk had no choice but to quickly move the patient. The wheelchair was stuck in the doorframe, and she couldn't push it no matter how hard she tried. As a result, Juno fell out of the wheelchair. Seeing that Taehan was about to arrive at her apartment, In-suk hurriedly pushed Juno toward the elevator. But just as the elevator doors opened, she collided head-on with her eldest son, Tae-woo. Tae-woo was also surprised by the scene, but in the end, he helped his mother move Juno. Tae-woo couldn't understand why his mother would bring a vegetative patient with her. At that moment, In-suk didn't know how to explain this to her son. When Taehan arrived at his mother's apartment, he saw that no one was home. Just as he was about to leave, A set of hospital clothes caught his attention. Taehan thought his mother had brought them home from her volunteer work, so he took the clothes and returned them to the nursing home staff. Just as Taehan was about to leave, he saw a photo on the wall. In an instant, a familiar face popped into his mind. Taehan wondered how Minsa's ex-husband ended up here. To confirm the man's identity, Taehan asked the staff for his name. Taehan learned that the man's name was Lee Yujin and that he had already been taken away by his family, so he didn't ask any further questions. The police discovered through surveillance footage that In-suk had sneaked into the nursing home on the day Juno went missing, so the police went straight to In-suk's house, took out the missing Juno, and asked her to identify him on the spot. But In-suk insisted that she didn't know the man in the photo. The police said that they had taken a hair sample from the patient and done a paternity test with Suki. As soon as the results came out, the truth would be revealed. Moreover, the test report would be sent to Suki's home immediately. Hearing this, In-suk finally showed a hint of panic. At that moment, Tae-woo suddenly called. In-suk pretended to hang up and placed the phone aside so that Tae-woo could hear her conversation with the police. At that moment, Tae-woo realized that the man his mother had moved that morning was actually Juno. If Juno's identity were discovered, his mother would be in trouble. Upon learning that the paternity test results were about to fall into his stepmother's hands, Tae-woo rushed back home. Fortunately, he managed to stop the delivery man and retrieve the paternity report. Just when he thought he had achieved his goal, Taehan saw the whole thing. He picked up the documents his brother had dropped and discovered that they were his stepmother's delivery. So Taehan immediately handed the documents to his stepmother. Suki got the report and quickly checked the test results. But in the end, she was disappointed. She never expected the paternity report to be invalid. In-suk was afraid that the police would find out that she had kidnapped Juno. To avoid exposing the truth, she decided to kill Juno. However, after she removed Juno's oxygen mask, Juno suddenly began convulsing violently and miraculously came back to life. Seeing this, In-suk was completely terrified. When she called the doctor to examine Juno, she discovered that he had lost his memory. Juno couldn't remember anything that had happened. At that moment, In-suk was instantly relieved. She decided to face Juno when he woke up and weave a lie. She said that she had raised Juno herself. Juno completely believed In-suk's words. He practiced walking every day without giving up. After lying down for 7 years, he just wanted to recover his health as soon as possible. In-suk also did a good job of keeping up appearances. Not only did she visit Juno at the rehabilitation center every day, she even took him outside for fresh air, appearing to be a qualified stepmother. Just as Juno was lamenting how he needed to regain his memory, In-suk suddenly changed her expression. At that moment, she once again harbored murderous intent toward the man before her, because if Juno regained his memory, she would face legal consequences. Just then, Juno suddenly called out to her, "Mom!" At that moment, In-suk instantly changed her mind. Since Juno had completely come to see her as his mother, she would keep him by her side and make him hers. In order to better monitor Juno, In-suk took him directly to her apartment and settled him in. At the same time, officer who was still investigating Juno's kidnapping case, in order to quickly catch the kidnapper, he deliberately spread the news that he would restore the surveillance footage from the day Juno was kidnapped from the nursing home. This completely threw In-suk off balance. In a panic, she arranged for someone to take the surveillance files under Officer Who's identity. The man then secretly threw the files into In-suk's car, but they didn't guess that this was a trap set by Officer Who. This time, they vowed to catch the mastermind behind it all. But halfway there, the car started smoking violently. Officer Who had to stop the car and quickly put out the fire. At that moment, Taehan happened to pass by and offered to give Officer Who and the others a ride. He knew that the 2 police officers were searching for Juno. Additionally, he had been secretly investigating the case recently. In-suk, upon obtaining the files, eagerly opened them to check. To her surprise, the files contained a tracking device. At that moment, Officer Who also arrived at the destination. In-suk realized she had fallen into a trap. Soon, the police and the criminals were engaged in a fierce struggle. Taehan stayed outside and quickly called the police. He was afraid that Officer Who was in danger, so he decided to go upstairs to help. Unexpectedly, he heard footsteps around the corner. Taehan quickly turned on his flashlight and was about to go check it out. He didn't know that it was his mother. Just as the mother and son were about to meet in this way, Taehan was suddenly knocked unconscious with a blow to the head. Hearing the man scream, In-suk realized that it was her younger son. Tae-woo was also shocked to see this scene. He didn't expect that they were beating up their own family. Just then, police sirens sounded outside. In order to avoid being caught by the police, Taewoo and his mother had no choice but to abandon Taehan and run away. Taehan was not taken to the hospital in time for treatment, which resulted in damage to his brain and blindness. The sudden tragedy left President Lee completely devastated. In-suk refused to accept the reality and took her anger out on Suki. She believed that it was Suki who had sent Taehan to find Juno, leading to this tragedy. Suki had no words to defend herself and let In-suk vent her anger. To everyone's surprise, In-suk went even further and tried to kick Suki out. After putting on a show, she quickly changed her expression. Her purpose was to make Suki feel bad, although Min-soo had already drawn a line with Taehan. When she heard that Taehan was injured, she couldn't help but rush to the hospital to visit him. But as soon as she entered the ward, she began to back away because she felt that she had no right to be there and quickly fled the scene. Taehan knew that Min-soo had come to visit him and anxiously chased after her. Even though he couldn't see, he didn't stop running. Min-soo saw Taehan fall to the ground for her sake and finally softened her heart. At this moment, it was too painful for a pair of lovers to be apart. Unexpectedly, Juno arrived at the hospital at the same time. When he saw Min-soo, he felt that the woman in front of him looked very familiar. At this moment, Taewoo appeared and forcibly pulled Juno away. Juno regained his ability to walk, which frightened In-suk. She was worried that the police and Suki would discover Juno and expose her identity, so she took the opportunity to make up a lie to deceive Juno. She said that he had always been a fugitive wanted by the police. He had become a vegetable as a result of a car accident while fleeing. Therefore, In-suk hoped that Juno would stay at home and not go out. Once the police closed the case, he could reveal himself later. Hearing In-suk's words, Juno is convinced that he is a fugitive. The next day, he goes to the police station to turn himself in. However, after much internal struggle, he still doesn't have the courage to go in. So Juno decides to go to the nursing home where he used to stay to recover his lost memories. Unexpectedly, the nurse says that he was kidnapped some time ago. Is he safe now because the kidnappers let him go? Juno is full of doubts. At that moment, the nurse handed him a business card and told him to find the person on the card. Unexpectedly, just as Juno arrived at the address on the business card, the man In-suk had sent to watch him caught up with him. Juno mistakenly thought that the man was the one who kidnapped him, so he quickly ran away, but accidentally bumped into Min-soo. When Min-soo picked up her bag, she realized that her ex-husband had run away. She immediately chased after him, calling her husband's name with a sad look on her face. Juno, who was hiding nearby, didn't know that the woman in front of him was his wife. He just stared blankly at the scene. At the same time, Taehan, who was in the hospital, finally regained his normal vision after a month of treatment. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the woman he loved, and he was very happy. At that moment, Taehan couldn't bear to let Min-soo leave him again. Mina was furious upon learning that Taehan was back with Min-soo. Enraged, she stormed over to Min-soo and unleashed her anger. Just as Mina was venting her fury at Min-soo, Min-soo received a call from Taehan's father, asking her to return to the company to resume her job. Mina, who overheard this, was furious. She never expected that even the chairman was on Min-soo's side this time. Taehan, fearing that Min-soo would refuse to return to the company, rushed over immediately. His heart couldn't bear to let go of this relationship. From the moment he lost his sight, he already knew the answer. And so, the next day, Min-soo returned to the company as a full-time employee. Mina was furious to see the person she despised appear before her again. What made her even more angry was that Min-soo's position was higher than hers. So Mina immediately told In-suk about it. In-suk naturally opposed Min-soo getting close to her son, so she went to her ex-husband's office to confront him about his decision. She even scolded Min-soo for having the nerve to come back to work. To her surprise, the chairman defended Min-soo the entire time, because Min-soo was not only his wife's former daughter-in-law but also the woman his son loved most. In-suk couldn't influence her ex-husband's decision and could do nothing about it. Since Min-soo returned to work, Mina's life has been miserable. Now the entire company was gossiping about how Mina was a woman who lied constantly. Despite the fact that Min-soo wasn't Taehan's intended bride, she had deceived everyone. Now, when comparing the two women, everyone preferred Min-soo, and no one liked Mina's spoiled temperament. Hearing her colleagues' mocking remarks behind her back, Mina was driven to the brink of madness in that moment. In a fit of anger, she cut off Min-soo's long hair. This time, Min-soo saw her true colors. All her tolerance had been rewarded with this treatment. That day, Mina learned a secret from her mother. Suki's son looked very similar to Lee Yujin at the nursing home. For a moment, Mina wondered if they were the same person. She immediately went to the nursing home to check the surveillance footage. Unexpectedly, Suki had also just arrived. They were both there for the same reason, to find the kidnapped Lee Yuzhen. When the surveillance footage from the nursing home was turned on, everyone saw Juno passing by the door. That day, Juno learned that he had Alzheimer's disease and broke down. He secretly vowed to find his lost memories. At that moment, he remembered a woman chasing after him and calling his name. He planned to find the truth from this woman. Just as Juno stepped out the front door, he was stopped by someone sent by In-suk. As he struggled to break free, a passerby recognized him. A few days earlier, Suki had seen her son's figure on the surveillance footage and was overcome with emotion. She had been posting missing person flyers on the street with her son's photo. She was about to give Juno her contact information. The bodyguard, seeing that things were getting out of hand, quickly intervened. The man noticed the suspicious behavior of the man beside him and immediately asked Juno if he wanted help calling the police. The bodyguard saw this and didn't stop Juno, who thus obtained the contact information. Just as Juno was about to be taken to a room, he took advantage of the bodyguard's inattention and quickly slipped out of the elevator and escaped. However, Juno eventually encountered Tae-woo, who was holding him captive. At the company, Tae-woo was furious upon learning that Juno was trying to recover his memories. He hypocritically sent his so-called younger brother to receive brain treatment. But Juno only wanted to find the woman who had mistaken him for someone else. So he asked In-suk to help him contact the person on the note. Unexpectedly, In-suk agreed on the surface, but secretly destroyed the contact information on the note. She wanted to make sure that Juno would never find his family, but In-suk had not counted on revealing the truth herself. She thought Juno had taken a sleeping pill and was unconscious, so she discussed with her son how to stop Juno from searching for Min-soo. Just as the mother and son were talking enthusiastically, Juno overheard their conversation. He couldn't believe it and asked In-suk who they really were. Why was he called Juno instead of Lee Yuzhen? But Tae-woo tried to deceive him by claiming he had dementia. But Juno didn't believe a single word they said. Seeing that everything had been exposed, In-suk stopped pretending. She immediately sent a group of people to lock Juno up in a mental hospital. No matter how much Juno struggled, he couldn't escape them. As a result, due to his emotional turmoil, his body began to convulse violently. The villains were so frightened by this scene that they hurried to notify Tae-woo. But when they arrived at the ward, they found that the patient was gone. It turned out that Juno had taken advantage of the fact that no one was watching and quietly escaped. But he was quickly found by the people who were looking for him. Juno could only use all his strength to run away quickly, until he escaped to a rooftop and bumped into someone. In-suk was panicked when she found out that Juno had escaped from the mental hospital. Tae-woo blamed his mother for dragging him into this incident. He said that one day he might become a murderer. Hearing her son's complaints, In-suk finally felt afraid. She imagined herself being arrested and sent to prison. After escaping to the rooftop, Juno was rescued by a man named Jae-hwan. Jae-hwan wanted to team up with Juno to get back at In-suk. Jae-hwan's father was In-suk's ex-boyfriend. 7 years ago, his father was brutally murdered by In-suk. So over the years, he had been investigating the woman's actions. Jae-hwan told Juno that the shipwreck that had killed his father and him was all part of In-suk's scheme. Now, all he wanted to do was help Juno regain his memory. Jae-hwan then introduced the woman in the photo as Juno's wife. At that moment, Juno realized he was already married, but he never imagined that his wife already had a boyfriend, and the two were already discussing marriage, because Taehan had already proposed to Min-soo, and the two were as happy as children in love. That evening, as Taehan was sending Min-soo home, he couldn't resist giving her a kiss before parting. Little did they know that Juno was watching them from behind. At that moment, he realized that his wife was already someone else's. What was even more devastating was that his mother had remarried and his father was already dead. As Juno was walking by the sea, he suddenly heard his mother's voice. At that moment, he remembered Jae-hwan had described his mother to him. Juno felt that he couldn't just leave like this. After all, he hadn't seen his mother in 7 years. Jae-hwan and Juno had a common enemy, so they decided to work together to get revenge on In-suk, the person responsible for their misfortunes. In order to obtain evidence of In-suk's crimes over the years, Jae-hwan hoped that Juno would remain by In-suk's side under the identity of Lee Yuzhen. Only then could they uncover useful clues. Driven by his urgent desire to avenge his father, Juno agreed to do so. Meanwhile, Tae-hun, having successfully proposed to Min-soo, quickly arranged for the two families to meet and discuss the wedding. Upon learning of this, Mina directly threatened Min-soo. Min-soo, seeing her unreasonable behavior, turned and left without looking back. Mina didn't expect Min-soo to be so unyielding. In-suk, seeing her son was going to marry a divorced woman, refused to agree. On the day before the wedding, She went to her ex-husband's house and caused a scene. The chairman immediately sent security to drag her out. He wouldn't allow such a woman to disrupt his family. In-suk had no choice but to accept this unwanted daughter-in-law, but she knew that even the best relationships would eventually grow tired. Without her blessing, the two were doomed to not last long. Ever since Juno ran away, In-suk had been sending people to follow him. In order to avoid arousing In-suk's suspicion, Juno pretended to know nothing and went to a nursing home to search for his memories. He also guessed that he was definitely being followed. Soon, a group of men in black caught up with Juno and tried to kidnap him. Juno pretended to resist and ran away desperately. In the process, he was knocked down by the men in black and hit his head. Unexpectedly, the blow knocked Juno unconscious and restored his memory. He remembered that he and Minsu were already married. At that moment, Juno was in extreme pain. The woman he loved deeply was about to marry another man. At that moment, Minsu was holding her wedding ceremony with Taehyun. In order to stop his wife from marrying someone else, Juno called Jaehwan and asked him to help stop the wedding. He said that he had regained his memory and remembered everything. He couldn't just stand by and watch Minsu marry someone else. But Jaehwan hoped that Juno wouldn't act impulsively at this moment. Otherwise, their plan would be ruined. But Juno had lost his mind and couldn't care less about that. After all, his wife was more important to him now. Unable to accept the truth, he rushed to his wife's wedding venue like a madman, because he couldn't let the woman he loved marry someone else. Just as Juno was about to rush to the scene to stop it, Jaehwan suddenly stopped him. Jaehwan told Juno that even if he barged into the wedding venue, it wouldn't make any difference. After all, Juno had been declared dead 7 years ago. Suddenly appearing in front of everyone now would only make everyone suffer. Moreover, Juno had already developed Alzheimer's disease. He would never be able to bring happiness to Minsu again. Hearing these cruel words, Juno was extremely emotional. In his heart, the scene of him and Minsu getting married seemed like it happened yesterday. Jaehwan said that the current Juno was no match for Taehyun. Only by letting go could he truly make the woman he loved happy. Juno was in agony when he heard Jaehwan's words. Although he was unwilling to accept it, every word Jaehwan said was true. He and Minsu were already two different people. Thus, Minsu and Taehyun successfully completed their wedding. Juno ultimately chose to bless the two of them. Minsu lived happily every day after her marriage. Even her son had already come to regard Taehyun as his father. At that moment, Juno stood outside the door, listening to the joyful laughter inside. His heart filled with indescribable complexity. He had already become the forgotten one. Now, the only thing Juno could do was make In-suk pay the price. So he pretended nothing had happened and returned to In-suk's home. This left In-suk feeling anxious and unsure of what to do. She didn't know how much of his memory Juno had regained. Learning that Juno hadn't remembered anything finally allowed her to breathe a sigh of relief. Just then, the doorbell rang suddenly. Juno immediately prepared to open the door. But upon hearing the sound, he realized it was Suki who had arrived. At that moment, In-suk was so scared that she grabbed Juno and refused to let him open the door. She told him to ignore the woman at the door, and that she would call security to chase her away. Just when In-suk thought Suki had left, the fire alarm suddenly went off throughout the entire building. In-suk was so scared that she pushed Juno away and ran for her life. Unexpectedly, when she opened the door, she was stunned. It turned out that it was Suki who had secretly pressed the alarm. Suki reminded her not to cause trouble for Minsu in the future. But before she could finish speaking, she saw Juno running out of the house. At that moment, Suki couldn't believe her eyes. It turned out that her son was alive and well, hiding in In-suk's house. When she called out her son's name, Juno pretended not to recognize his mother and introduced himself as Lee Yujin. But Suki was certain that the man in front of her was her son. In-suk, fearing that Juno might regain his memory, tried to push Suki away. Instead, she was pushed to the ground by Suki. Juno quickly knelt down and asked his mother if she was okay. Upon hearing this, Suki felt her heart shatter. She couldn't understand why Juno called someone else mom. Juno was the child she had raised with her own hands. Suki was unwilling to give up and desperately banged on the door to see her son. She didn't expect to be kicked out of the apartment by security, no matter how Juno pretended not to recognize her. A mother's familiarity with her son cannot be wrong. Suki still didn't understand why her son was living with In-suk. Just as she was feeling more and more desperate, Juno suddenly rushed out and hugged his mother. The little boy called Juno dad the first time he saw him. Juno thought the boy had mistaken him for someone else and didn't think much of it. But when his mother told him that the child was his biological son, Juno couldn't believe it and rushed to the kindergarten that day. It turned out that during the 7 years he was missing, his wife had given birth to his child. Juno burst into tears and wanted to hug his son. whom he had never seen before. Unfortunately, the child already had another father. Fearing his identity would be exposed, Juno avoided eye contact and hid. At that moment, Minsu noticed the man beside her and felt his back looked familiar. It wasn't until her son called out that she didn't go to check. The boy waved goodbye to Juno from a distance. Juno could only say goodbye with a heavy heart, but when their car drove away, he changed his mind. He couldn't bear the thought of his wife and child being taken away from him, so he ran after the car for 10 kilometers. Ever since Juno returned, Suki had been living in self-reproach. She had introduced her son's beloved woman to her stepson with her own hands. When Suki learned that her grandson was calling Taehan dad, she felt even more heartbroken for her son, because this happiness was originally meant for Juno. But now that he's back, he's alone. Suki felt even more sorry for her son when she thought about this, but she couldn't bring herself to destroy the happiness Minsu had just found. When Juno returned home, he beat Jaehwan senseless. If it weren't for Jaehwan's intervention, he would have stopped the wedding, and Jaehwan hadn't told him about his son earlier. If Juno had known he had a son, he would never have agreed to Minsu marrying him. But Jaehwan believed that Juno not only had dementia, but also wanted to avenge his father. His current physical condition would not allow him to give Mina and her son a happy life. At that moment, Jaehwan's words stabbed Juno's heart once again. Juno was walking down the street in a daze when Mina bumped into him. She couldn't believe that the man she had once had a secret crush on was still alive. Surprisingly, Juno impatiently shook off her hand, expressing his disgust at being mistaken for someone else. He formally introduced himself as Li Yuzhen. Hearing this, Mina froze in her tracks. To confirm whether Li Yuzhen was really Juno, Mina contacted a detective. However, after the detective's inquiries, no information about Li Yuzhen could be found. At that moment, Mina grew increasingly suspicious. She immediately retrieved the clothes that Li Yuzhen had touched yesterday. She decided to take Juno and Suki's hair for a paternity test to uncover the truth. Thus, Mina's mother went to Suki's house under the pretense of looking for her. When she found out Suki wasn't home, she sneaked into the room. However, after a thorough search, she couldn't find a single strand of hair. With no other options, Sunjae used a magnifying glass to search the floor. Taehan suddenly burst into the room, scaring her half to death. Luckily, she hid behind the door and wasn't discovered. Just as Sunjae was about to relax, Suki suddenly came in. Soki, who was in a bad mood, didn't notice anyone behind the door. Soon, Sunjae and her daughter found out that Li Yuzhen was actually Juno. Mina deliberately told Minsu that Juno was still alive. She hoped Minsu would go see the poor man, but Minsu didn't believe her and explained that even if her ex-husband came back alive, she wouldn't leave Taehan. But in the end, Minsu couldn't forget Juno. The next day, she followed Mina to see how much Li Yuzhen really looked like her ex-husband. At that moment, Juno was thinking about how to escape In Suk's surveillance. Just then, Mina called his name from behind him. When Minsu saw Juno, she couldn't believe her eyes. Just as she was about to rush forward and hug Juno, her current husband pulled her back in time. Taehan said that the man was not Juno, but Li Yuzhen. Juno immediately explained that his name was Li Yuzhen. After saying that, he left the scene without looking back. Juno didn't reveal his identity and was in immense pain inside. He knew that he couldn't make Minsu happy now. Moreover, he had to avenge his father and couldn't reveal his identity, so Juno could only bear this pain alone. After Minsu was brought back by Taehan, she was very emotional. She was sure that Li Yuzhen was her ex-husband Juno. Taehan felt very sorry for his wife's pain. He tried his best to comfort Minsu, saying that she must have mistaken him for someone else. Meanwhile, Soki, standing outside the door, knew that her daughter-in-law had seen her son. However, she ultimately kept the truth from Minsu because she had promised Juno to keep it a secret, so she could only lie and say that Minsu had mistaken someone else. Suki believed that since her daughter-in-law had already married someone else, she should not dwell on Juno anymore. Ever since Suki and her son had been reunited, they had not been able to see each other, which made her feel increasingly anxious. She was really worried that Juno would be in danger with In Suk. She hoped that her son would forget his hatred and return to her. So the next day, Suki asked Juno to meet her and asked him to give up his revenge. She had already lost her husband and did not want to lose her son as well. If In Suk really had to pay the price, then she would also have to be involved. Mina obtained the paternity test results for Juno and Suki and immediately prepared to hand them over to the chairman. However, on her way there, she encountered Juno shouting "Mom" at Suki. At that moment, Mina was completely convinced of her suspicions. She immediately brandished the test results in front of the mother and son. Gloating, she even arrogantly declared that she would hand this over to the chairman. Juno didn't want the truth to be exposed and rushed to stop her. Mina even dragged Minsu into the chairman's office with her. She immediately locked the door and prepared to take out the paternity test. In-suk was so scared she almost wet her pants. To prevent the truth from being exposed, she took the document. As they struggled, In-suk accidentally fell to the ground. Mina confidently took the report and prepared to open it, but the moment she opened it, she was stunned. The paternity report showed that Lee Yujin and Suki were not mother and son. Everyone was satisfied with this result. After all, no one wanted the truth to be exposed. Because of her reckless behavior, Mina could only kneel in front of the president and beg for forgiveness. She didn't expect that Taewoo had tampered with her report. In-suk finally breathed a sigh of relief upon learning that her son had switched the paternity report. Mina's reckless actions always angered her father. He believed that since Taehan was already married, he shouldn't be dwelling on the past. If he couldn't let go, he should move to the United States. The father and daughter had a heated argument over the matter. Enraged, Mina arranged to meet Taewoo for drinks to vent her frustration. In the end, she got completely drunk and was taken to a hotel by Taewoo. When Mina woke up the next morning, she was shocked. What was even more shocking was that there was a man lying in the room. Although nothing had happened between them the previous night, Mina's happiness was ruined that night. They were seen leaving the hotel together by Taehan and his wife. Mina tried to explain, but the misunderstanding grew even worse. It was because Taewoo suddenly took her hand out of nowhere and said they had slept at the hotel together last night. Just as he finished speaking, Mina's father happened to see the scene. The old man thought his daughter had been taken advantage of and was about to scold Taewoo. After Mina explained everything, he realized it was all a misunderstanding. Upon hearing about this, Sunja secretly rejoiced, because she had always supported her daughter's relationship with Taewoo. Surprisingly, Taewoo declared his intention to pursue Mina. His motive was to obtain Mina's father's shares in the company. By marrying Mina, he would become the company's largest shareholder. However, Mina had no interest in Taewoo. No matter how her mother pleaded, she refused to consider a relationship with him. With no other options, Sunja resorted to spreading rumors at the company, claiming that the two were already planning their wedding. Before long, the rumor reached the chairman's ears. The chairman was very angry when he heard the rumor, but Taewoo asked his father to agree to the marriage. He believed that marrying Mina would only be beneficial and not harmful. Taehan and Suki were the first to stand up and oppose it. They believed that Mina and Taewoo were not suitable for marriage. At this point, Taewoo had already made up his mind and no one could persuade him. Mina refused to leave the house every day because she didn't want to marry Taewoo. Her mother urged her not to reject the marriage, as marrying into a wealthy family would make her the eldest daughter-in-law. Mina firmly stated that she didn't want to see Minsu, the woman who had caused all this. Due to Taewoo's constant scandals at the company, his father had no choice but to agree to the marriage. Just as the two families were preparing for the wedding, In-suk suddenly received a threatening recording. The content was a conversation between In-suk and her boyfriend discussing Taewoo's background. Unfortunately, Sunja overheard the recording. At that moment, she realized that Taewoo was not the chairman's biological son. This sudden piece of bad news left her devastated. After all, she had persuaded her daughter for a long time before she finally agreed to the marriage. In-suk told Sunja not to get upset and that as long as no one else knew about this, Mina would still be the daughter-in-law of the wealthy family. The innocent Sunja believed In-suk's lie. Soon, the parents from both families sat down together to discuss the wedding arrangements. Although Sunja disagreed, she had no choice but to comply. One day, Taewoo accidentally discovered that his father-in-law did not hold any shares in the company. Upon learning this, In-suk immediately confronted Sunja in a rage. After all, Taewoo had only wanted to marry Mina because of her father's shares. Now In-suk realized that her family had no value at all. Sunja believed that Taewoo wasn't even the chairman's biological son, so marrying her daughter was already a good deal. Upon hearing the news, the chairman fainted in anger. After emergency treatment, he was fortunately out of danger. Taking advantage of the chairman's fainting spell, Taewoo became the company's representative director. However, on his first day in office, rumors spread that he was an illegitimate child. Taewoo learned from his mother that his father had fainted after discovering his true identity. Soon, the chairman regained some consciousness. Taewoo rushed to the hospital in panic. However, as soon as he entered the hospital room, he saw his father whispering something to his younger brother. At that moment, Taewoo felt extremely guilty and hurriedly asked his younger brother what their father was saying. But at that moment, Taehan's gaze sent a chill down his spine. In fact, Taehan did not hear the truth about why his father fainted from his father's mouth. His father only reminded him to ask his mother to find out the answer. So Taehan had no choice but to ask his mother what had happened. In-suk dared not tell her younger son the truth and could only lie that his father was talking nonsense. She angrily scolded her son. That day, while Taehan was helping Minsu sort through Juno's belongings, he accidentally saw that Juno had signed up for the company's design competition. He also saw the villa behind Juno in the photo. This couldn't help but remind Taehan of how his older brother had plagiarized a designer's work back then. And today, he finally learned that it was his older brother who had stolen Juno's design. Taehan connected his father's fainting spell with his older brother's design plagiarism. Although Taehan had known about his older brother's actions back then, he chose to cover it up because he was family. Now, he deeply regretted the choice he had made. He took Juno's old competition application form and threw it in front of his older brother. Taehan said that this time, he would reveal the truth to the public. It was only after their father collapsed that Taewoo became the representative director of the company. If his younger brother revealed the truth, he would lose everything. Taewoo had no choice but to ask his younger brother to meet with him face to face to admit his mistake. He even knelt in front of him and begged him to forgive him. Taehan said firmly that he had already made up his mind. He asked his older brother if he could think about the issue from Juno's perspective. Taewoo could only stand there and lose his temper when he heard his younger brother's words. Taehan had originally planned to reveal the truth early in the morning, but unexpectedly, his older brother beat him to it. Taewoo had no choice but to stand in front of the TV and admit that he had plagiarized the work, but throughout the entire process, he only talked about the trivial matters that happened back then. Taewoo explained that he took Juno's work out of desperation. He thought that it would be a waste not to publish the work since the contestant had already passed away. Moreover, he claimed that he had obtained the deceased's work with the consent of his family. This enraged Juno, who was watching the TV. He knew it was time to act. Just then, Taewoo suddenly switched to a news report during the live broadcast, revealing that he was the illegitimate son of the K-group. Even the recording In-suk had obtained was played on TV. At that moment, everyone was stunned. In-suk, terrified, pushed over the camera without caring about her appearance. Her guilty behavior was also broadcast live. Soon, this big secret made headlines online. In-suk was afraid that Taewoo would be kicked out of the house by her ex-husband. She could only rush to the hospital to explain to her ex-husband that the recording was fake. Taehan was indeed his biological son. Seeing his ex-wife lying so blatantly, the chairman only felt disgusted. But when he saw his son looking so nervous in front of him, he instantly felt sorry for him. After all, he had raised his son for 30 years and no longer cared about blood relations. Mina was shocked to discover that Taewoo was In-suk's illegitimate son. She had just registered her marriage with Taewoo not long ago. Now, before they had even had their wedding, something like this had happened. So Mina reminded Taewoo to be prepared to divorce her. In-suk was worried that Taewoo would be in trouble because of the illegitimate son, so she called the police, hoping they could help her catch the person spreading the rumors. But her actions were like throwing herself into a trap, because Juno and Jaehwan had already found a lot of evidence of In-suk's crimes. They had already sent the evidence to Officer Hu. That day, Juno suddenly pulled Minsu into his arms on the street, saving her from a speeding motorcycle. However, Minsu did not push the man holding her away, but instead lingered in his arms, enjoying the familiar scent. Only her ex-husband had this scent. At this moment, Minsu stared at the man in front of her and was completely stunned. Why did Lee Yujin look exactly like her ex-husband? But Juno refused to admit his identity. He was afraid that he would not be able to control his true feelings, so he quickly left. Soki, standing nearby, saw her son's reaction and felt heartbroken for him. After all, 7 years ago, Minsu and her son had been so in love. Now, because of an accident, the newlywed couple had lost each other forever. Juno couldn't reveal his feelings in front of Minsu, so he hid in the parking lot and cried in secret. Suki knew her son's pain but didn't know how to comfort him, because Juno lost Minsu the moment she got married. Ever since Minsu smelled Lee Yujin's scent, she once again suspected that this man could be her ex-husband, so she secretly went to the police station to investigate Lee Yujin's identity. Unexpectedly, this man named Lee Yujin had a different face. It was obvious that Juno was impersonating him. When Minsu found her mother-in-law with the photo to confront her, just as Suki was at a loss, Juno suddenly appeared in the restaurant. It turned out that Minsu had intentionally called both mother and son over to clarify the man's identity, until the moment the two locked eyes again. Minsu could no longer suppress her longing for Juno. She rushed toward the man and embraced him without hesitation. Minsu firmly believed that the man before her was her husband who had passed away 7 years ago, but Juno ruthlessly pushed Minsu away and left the restaurant. Minsu followed closely behind and asked Juno why he wouldn't admit who he was. At that moment, Juno no longer continued to pretend. He asked Minsu why she would come back when no one would be happy to see her. He had been declared dead 7 years ago. Now everyone was living a happy life. Who would remember him? Even if he came back alive. Their marriage was already over. So Juno begged Minsu to treat him as a stranger from now on. It would be best if she treated him as if he were dead and forgot about him. After saying that, Juno disappeared without looking back. Minsu couldn't understand how Juno could have changed so much. She asked her mother-in-law what had happened. Suki could only hug her daughter-in-law and say she was sorry. She knew that her son had said those things out of desperation. At that moment, Juno was hiding in a secluded spot, sobbing uncontrollably. He hadn't done anything wrong. Why had he ended up like this? 7 years ago, he and Minsu had been a loving couple. Now everything had changed, and there was no going back. Juno wept bitterly, demanding of the heavens why this was so unfair. Why had they taken away everything he had once possessed? Since Minsu had last seen her ex-husband Juno, she had developed emotional issues with her current husband. This caused a rift between the newlyweds. Suki told Minsu about everything Juno had been through over the years. Minsu then learned that In-suk was the one who killed her father-in-law. What made Minsu even more devastated was that officer who found out that In-suk had been convicted of a hit-and-run accident. The man who was killed was Minsu's father. Minsu's mother happened to be a witness to the accident. Soon, Minsu's entire family found out about this. Taehan knew he couldn't make up for his mother's crimes. He could only kneel before his mother-in-law's family and admit his mistakes. But Minsu's family couldn't accept In-suk's actions anymore. Minsu's grandmother was so furious that she wanted to kick Taehan out. No one knew how desperate she had been over the years since losing her son. Minsu's grandmother had always believed that her son had been killed by this family. Today, she learned that her son had actually been killed by In-suk. At this moment, Minsu was torn between two choices. After all, she truly loved Taehan, but she also truly hated him. The pain was too much. So Minsu confided in her mother-in-law. Suki could only advise her daughter-in-law not to blame Taehan. They couldn't let In-suk ruin their marriage. Although Minsu thought her mother-in-law's words made sense, she couldn't bring herself to face her husband the way she used to. At the same time, Juno and Jaewon also began their plan for revenge. The two exposed In-suk's hit-and-run accident to the media. They also exposed the fact that Tae-woo is not the chairman's biological son. At that moment, all the major media outlets rushed to report the news. In-suk was surrounded by reporters vying for interviews. However, due to lack of evidence, the police were unable to arrest her on the spot. In-suk had come to her ex-husband's company with the intention of helping her eldest son seize the company's position. When she saw Suki and Juno also at the company, she deliberately told Suki about Juno's Alzheimer's disease. Upon hearing this, Suki was unable to accept it and fainted on the spot. Juno no longer pretended and directly called out Mom. At that moment, Taehan realized that Lee Yujin was actually Juno. In-suk also knew that Juno had finally regained his memory. The fact that her son had such a serious illness made Suki shed tears. She never imagined that her son's life would be so tragic. Minsu was heartbroken to learn that her ex-husband had a terminal illness. She finally understood why he had refused to acknowledge her. Suki and Minsu both hoped that Juno would receive treatment as soon as possible. Juno cried and told his mother that he would definitely receive treatment. In-suk's glamorous appearance at the shareholders' meeting was quickly reported on TV. Grandma Minsu was furious when she saw her enemy gloating. That day, she rushed to the shareholders' meeting to give In-suk a piece of her mind. Due to Minsu's grandmother's outburst, the shareholders' meeting had to be halted. The chairman learned of his ex-wife's actions through Minsu's grandmother. He knew In-suk was a bad woman, but he never imagined she could be so cruel. This left the chairman speechless in the face of Minsu's grandmother, and he could only apologize shamefully. Soon, the meeting resumed normally. This time, the chairman handed over the company's representative position to his wife. His two sons were both eliminated. This enraged In-suk, who jumped up and declared that none of this could stand. Before she could finish speaking, Tae-woo got into trouble again. The shareholders believed that Tae-woo had previously committed plagiarism and should be immediately removed from his position as company president. In an instant, all of In-suk's plans were shattered. She wanted to vent all her anger on Suki. Unexpectedly, the police burst in at that moment and arrested In-suk on charges of murder. Juno also revealed his true identity at the scene and exposed all of In-suk's past deeds to everyone. It turned out that In-suk had 3 lives on her hands. Thus, In-suk was arrested by the police at the shareholders' meeting. The once powerful woman was even beaten up by her cellmates in prison. Seeing her enemy receive his punishment, Juno finally returned to his rightful position. Min-soo's grandmother looked at Juno, who was still alive, and felt an indescribable sadness. She knew that Juno had suffered a lot outside before daring to return. She even blamed herself for letting Min-soo marry so young. Otherwise, Juno would have returned to reunite with them long ago. So Grandma Min-soo hoped that Juno could be reunited with his granddaughter. Only then would the family of three be truly reunited. Standing outside the door, Taehan heard their words and felt very uncomfortable. It seemed that he and Min-soo had no future together. To that family, he was a sinner. Now that Juno was back, shouldn't he gracefully step aside? Thinking of the happiness he had once known, Taehan felt like he had been living in a dream these past few days. Ever since In-suk was arrested by the police, she has been beaten up by old Lee's thugs every day. As a result, In-suk was covered in bruises and had to be hospitalized. Her children were heartbroken when they saw this, but since their mother had broken the law, they had no right to interfere. Surprisingly, In-suk managed to escape while she was in the hospital. With nowhere to go, she had no choice but to ask her youngest son to send her money. Min-soo asked her husband who had called. At that moment, Taehan didn't know how to respond. With his mother on one side and his wife on the other, he didn't know which side to take. But after much internal struggle, Taehan chose to go see his mother. He tried to persuade her to turn herself in to the police, but In-suk didn't want to go to prison. Instead, she asked her son to get her more money so she could escape to another country. Before she could finish, the police arrived. In-suk thought her son had called the police and betrayed her, so she pushed her son aside without hesitation and chose to flee once again. When Juno tried to chase after the criminals, Taehan stopped him. After escaping, In-suk was reduced to fighting with street beggars for a place to sleep. When she was hungry, she looked at the food stalls on the street and swallowed her saliva. In-suk finally managed to exchange the diamonds on her body for some money, but it was stolen by bad people. A kind passerby offered to help her call the police, but she stopped him. Now, just hearing the word police made her tremble with fear, but In-suk was doomed to face her fears. It turned out that the pawnshop owner had recognized In-suk as a fugitive and took the opportunity to call the police. This terrified In-suk, who quickly hid in an alley. Just as she was about to breathe a sigh of relief, she saw her disheveled reflection in the mirror. At that moment, In-suk didn't feel that she had done anything wrong. On the contrary, she felt that it was all thanks to Juno. Unwilling to give up, she asked Mina to help her prepare some money to run away. She was willing to give Mina her shares in the company. Mina naturally agreed to all these benefits. However, the woman didn't know that she had already been targeted by the police. Soon, officer who found the place where In-suk was hiding, but when he opened the door, he found that she had already fled. He only saw Mina holding the money and hiding inside the house. Officer who immediately searched the area for In-suk. Just as In-suk was about to collide with the police, Tae-woo quickly pulled his mother aside, narrowly escaping danger. This time, even Tae-woo hoped his mother would turn herself in voluntarily, because all three siblings had been dragged down by their mother. Tae-woo was eventually kicked out of the house by his father for harboring his mother. Taehan was forced to divorce his newlywed wife because of his mother's mistakes. Taemin just found out that her boyfriend Jae-hwan was actually her brother by name. Jae-hwan had been using her to seek revenge. Unable to accept this reality, Taemin ran aimlessly into the middle of the road. Jae-hwan rushed over in time and pushed Taemin out of the way, falling into a pool of blood himself. In-suk was heartbroken when she heard what had happened to the three children. What hurt her even more was her poor daughter, so she took the initiative to ask Taemin out to express her guilt. Unexpectedly, Taemin had already informed the police. By the time In-suk realized what was happening, it was too late. It turned out that the children wanted to send her to prison with their own hands. Juno learned from the doctor that he did not have Alzheimer's disease and that he must have been misdiagnosed. Hearing this news, Ho was shocked. He had once thought that he would never be able to make Min-soo happy. Now that he did not have a terminal illness, he had to win back the woman he loved most. However, Min-soo had been married to her second husband for less than 20 days. Her husband's mother was the woman who had killed her father, which affected the newlyweds' relationship. However, Taehan still hoped his wife would not abandon him. Faced with the pleas of two men, Min-soo was at a loss for what to do. After all, no matter which husband she chose, the other would be hurt. Just as Min-soo was torn between the two, her grandmother made the decision for her. The old woman believed that Taehan's mother was the murderer of her son. This made her deeply resent Taehan. Therefore, she hoped Min-soo would choose to be with Juno. Moreover, Juno was the biological father of the child. Juno had suffered a lot over the years and should return to reunite with his family. However, Minsu had already let go of her feelings for her first husband and only felt sympathy and a sense of obligation toward him. After all, the man she loved most now was Tae-hun. Before Minsu could make a decision, Juno packed his bags and moved in that very night. Grandmother was overjoyed to see this and warmly welcomed Juno back. Only Minsu stood aside with mixed feelings. She angrily asked Juno why he had to move in. At least she hadn't divorced Tae-hun yet. Juno looked at his wife's unhappy expression and felt indescribable pain. He only knew that he had lost everything in one night. So now he didn't want to watch his wife and son belong to someone else. He just wanted to return to where he was before. If Minsu still loved Tae-hun, he didn't care if he had to wait forever. In the future, Juno would try his best to make up for the fatherly love his son had missed out on and take this opportunity to build a good relationship with Chan. He didn't tell his son the truth about himself. Chan already knew that Juno was his father. However, what the child said next made Juno feel a little disappointed. Chan said that he now had another father. In his son's heart, he didn't feel like he was losing a father. Shaokan thought he could have two fathers by his side at the same time. Now, the most painful person was naturally Tae-hun, because he was the sinner of the family and didn't know how to keep his wife. After thinking about it for many days, Minsu finally made a difficult decision. She took off the wedding ring Tae-hun had given her and returned it to him. At first, Minsu intended to end her relationship with both husbands, but for the sake of giving her son a complete family, she had no choice but to choose to live with Juno. At least the child would have a biological father by his side and a complete family. When Tae-hun heard these words, tears welled up in his eyes. He pleaded pitifully with Minsu not to abandon him, but his pleas ultimately did not change Minsu's mind. Juno thought his son had fully accepted him as his father, but when he saw the child's sketchbook, he realized how important Tae-hun was to his son. So, before Tae-hun left for the United States, Juno brought his son to see him one last time. Tae-hun didn't know that this would be the last time he would see his father. When he found out that Tae-hun was leaving, he was very sad. Seeing his son one last time allowed Tae-hun to fulfill his wish. He could finally leave the country with peace of mind. Unaware of this, Minsu was still packing Tae-hun's luggage. She planned to return all the items Tae-hun had left behind. The next day, Minsu unexpectedly saw Tae-hun's resignation letter at the company. After much hesitation, Suki finally told Minsu about her stepson's decision to leave. Minsu, who had already let go of her feelings, was completely thrown into chaos at that moment. Meanwhile, Tae-hun had already arrived at the airport, ready to leave this heartbreaking place. Just as he was about to board the plane, he received a call saying his mother had fainted. It turned out that In-suk had been bullied by a thug in prison and knocked unconscious. This forced Tae-hun, who was about to board the plane, to abandon his plans to leave the country. After emergency treatment by doctors, In-suk managed to survive. Unfortunately, she had become a vegetable. This news left her 3 children devastated. What puzzled the doctors was that In-suk's test results were all normal. Logically, the test results of a vegetative state patient should not be like this. This made the doctors begin to doubt themselves, but no one knew that all of this was the work of Tae-woo. He had intentionally injected his mother with a sedative. As long as he could deceive the police, he could smoothly apply for overseas treatment. Then he and his mother could escape abroad and live a carefree life. Due to the sedative's effects, In-suk remained unconscious for 2 days and 2 nights before finally waking up. Starving, she grabbed a piece of bread and devoured it greedily. Little did she know that before she could finish eating, she heard the sound of her youngest son banging on the door. Tae-hun, worried about his mother's condition, had come to stay by her bedside. At that moment, In-suk could only lie in the hospital bed, nervously pretending to be asleep. Tae-woo watched this unfold, unsure of what to do with his younger brother. In the end, Tae-hun did not notice anything unusual about his mother. After divorcing her husband, Minsu prepared to resign from the company. However, as soon as she arrived at the company, she saw Tae-hun walking toward her. At that moment, the two looked at each other, their eyes filled with sadness. In the end, they became strangers, unable even to greet each other. Tae-woo now planned to take his mother abroad to start a new life, but he couldn't bear to give up everything he had now. So he went to his stepmother's office and copied all the company's latest technical documents. Tae-woo intended to take this new technology abroad to sell it, ensuring that he and his mother would have a comfortable life in the future. Just as he had planned everything, he discovered that his wife was pregnant at that very moment. At that moment, Tae-woo didn't know what to do. If he abandons his pregnant wife and mother to flee abroad, he will live with a guilty conscience for the rest of his life. As Tae-woo is torn between his options, his mother pleads with him not to hesitate. In-suk, fearing imprisonment, desperately urges her son to proceed with the original plan. To protect his mother, Taewoo has no choice but to follow her instructions. He believes that with the new technology, he can still have a future abroad. Soon, the day arrives for In-suk to apply for overseas medical treatment. Taewoo followed his mother onto the ambulance with high hopes. This time, the mother and son could finally escape abroad to live a carefree life. In-suk was so excited that she opened her eyes halfway there. She urged the driver to speed up and head straight to the airport. At that moment, Taewoo looked deeply troubled because he felt guilty about abandoning his wife. When he saw his wife calling him at that moment, In-suk snatched the phone from her son and turned it off on the spot. This left Taewoo feeling inexplicably sad. Just then, the mother and son realized that the ambulance wasn't heading toward the airport. In a panic, they told the driver to stop immediately. Unfortunately, the driver they had hired had turned out to be Officer Who drove the ambulance straight to the police station. When the door opened, the mother and son completely broke down. In the end, Taewoo became a prisoner for helping his mother. Mina was so angry that she wanted to abort the 3 children in her womb. She hated her husband for knowing that she was pregnant and still abandoning the 4 of them. Since that was the case, there was no need to bring the children into this world. Taewoo finally realized that he had done something wrong. He pitifully begged his wife not to give up their children. Mina said that it was all Taewoo's fault. No matter how much Taewoo begged, it was too late. Mina had deliberately used this tactic to get back at her husband. She wanted him to live in misery in prison. She couldn't bear to give up the 3 children in her womb. She would give birth to them and raise them well. When Taewoo met his mother again in prison, both mother and son had become prisoners. When In-suk saw her son, she was filled with guilt. But at this point, Taewoo hated his mother with a passion for ruining his life. It was she who had led him step by step into hell and caused the situation today. Because of his mother's crime, Taehan was forced to live a painful life outside. To ease his guilt towards Min-soo, he gave all his shares to Taechan. Taehan felt that this was the only way he could feel a little better. Juno's relationship with his wife was strained because of a crack in their engagement ring. He knew that this crack was like a crack in their relationship. It seemed like it was time to let go. After all, neither of them would be happy if Min-soo was tied to him. So he told Min-soo about Taehan's plan to settle in the United States, hoping she would make her final decision. If Min-soo couldn't bear to let Taehan leave, she should rush to the airport to stop him. After hearing Juno's words, Min-soo was distracted at work. In the end, she couldn't control herself and rushed after him. At the airport, she looked everywhere for Taehan. She didn't know if she had come to keep Taehan or to say goodbye. When Min-soo saw Taehan, she began to hesitate. She didn't know what was the point of chasing after him, since the 2 of them were destined not to be together. It was better to let go. In the end, the 2 lovers did not choose to be together. They knew that separation was the best outcome. After Taehan boarded the plane, In-suk stared blankly at the sky for a long time. As if sensing something, she knew that she had ruined her 3 children's lives. In the midst of her inner pain and self-blame, In-suk closed her eyes at the last moment. A year quickly passed. With the help of her parents, Mina raised her 3 children. Although life was hard, it was still happy. Mina did not divorce her husband in order to give her children a complete family. Taewoo looked at the photos of his 3 sons and felt nothing but happiness. Min-soo worked hard and her career flourished. She became a very popular designer. At the same time, Juno caught up with Min-soo. After a year of effort, he achieved his dream. He started his own studio and became a top designer. Juno's life is now back on track. These days, he often takes his mother to play with his son. Although Min-soo occasionally thinks of Taehan, she knows that they both want each other to be happy. So, Min-soo finally decided to let go of the past and accept her new life. She is willing to give Juno another chance to make up for the 7 years they lost. Since that's the case, why not take a bold step forward and become each other's support? Today's story comes to an end here. Thank you all for your support and companionship. See you next time.